Are Republican leaders committing a crime by sending migrants to Democratic areas? Will the DOJ launch an investigation? Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matt Mangino comes on to discuss. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
What Ron DeSantis is saying is, I don't want them in my party. I told y'all I don't want them in my party, but if you insist when they get here, they are your responsibility now, being that these states are sanctuary cities. And being that these states are sanctuary cities, that shouldn't be a problem. The only reason I'm giving Ron DeSantis donkey today is because he should have gave Martha's Vineyard advance notice, okay? All of these governors from Texas, Florida, Arizona, don't just put these humans on buses and planes and ship them to sanctuary cities. Let the sanctuary cities know they are coming. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. And second, it's the same reason we want people's votes on record, so we can see who's really about that life.
This was quite the story, and I'm sure you've seen it on the news. In an effort to address the issue of immigration and the southern border, Republican leaders have engaged in this campaign of sending migrants to Democratic hotspots. This includes Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sending migrants who cross the U.S.-Mexico border to Martha's Vineyard. And then you have Texas Governor Greg Abbott sending 2 buses of migrants to the Washington, D.C. home of Vice President Kamala Harris. In fact, it is now being reported that the 50 migrants at Martha's Vineyard are being moved to a military base in order to better take care of them. And while, this political action has fueled praise and condemnation, depending upon which side of the aisle you're looking at, the real question here, the critical question, is this illegal what they're doing? California Governor Gavin Newsom says that there needs to be an actual probe here. He said, quote, "What DeSantis and Abbott are doing isn't clever. It's cruel. I'm formally requesting the DOJ begin an immediate investigation into these inhumane efforts to use kids as political pawns." He actually tweeted this. So, to make sense of this, let me bring in criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matt Mangino. Matt, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on Sidebar.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jesse.
So before we start, let me go forward a little bit further into what Newsom said. He said, quote, "Like millions of Americans, I have been horrified at the images of migrants being shipped on buses and planes across the country to be used as political props. Clearly, transporting families, including children, across state lines under false pretenses is morally reprehensible, but it also may be illegal." Is this illegal, Matthew?
Well, Jesse, if you look at the federal kidnapping statute, it talks about abducts, seizes, carries away. So these immigrants are being, against their will or under false pretenses, being put on a plane or a bus and being transported to places that are not prepared to handle their particular situation. Often at the border, there's an apparatus in place to get these people through a process, begin the process of possibly permitting them to enter and stay in the country. To take somebody to Martha's Vineyard is really putting somebody in a very precarious, difficult situation without any real support.
And by the way, just to step back, the reason this is happening is they're trying to say to Democrats, look at what we're dealing with at the southern border. There's a crisis, a humanitarian crisis happening there. We're going to send the migrants to your location. Now you can see what we're dealing with. And how are you going to equip? Because if you call it a humanitarian crisis by you, it's being, kind of hypocritical because now you're putting them in a military base. You're seeing what we're dealing with. And they're trying to make a political point here. I guess the question is, does it all come down to what the migrants were told? In other words, if they're being told that they're getting on these planes or buses for work opportunities, that there's going to be something there waiting for them, and it's not, is that the central question? Because it's not as if, and nothing's come out, that they've been, against their will transported to places. I think that's a key distinction there as well. They're voluntarily going. I guess it's just if they were promised something, and does it become a question of what they were promised and how they were promised or what they were told?
Right. I believe, Jesse, if they're being told something that isn't true, then they're being, in a sense, coerced into going along with this idea when, in fact, it's not for an employment opportunity. It's not to expedite your immigration process. It's merely to use these people as a political tool. So this is really about politics and really the most reprehensible aspect of politics, that you would take vulnerable families and children and put them on buses or planes and send them off someplace just to prove a point to your Democratic opponents, to the vice president, or to some other Democratic officials in Massachusetts or generally across the United States. So it's really it's cruel, as Governor Newsom said, and it really, I don't see, serves any legitimate purpose in this process.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said some politicians would rather not only have an issue, but exacerbate it to the extent of literal human trafficking. Does this classify as human trafficking? And also, I think someone's thrown around racketeering. Does this fall into human trafficking or racketeering at all?
Well, if you can show, for instance, that this was a kidnapping and that various people were involved in this criminal enterprise to kidnap these people from the state of Texas and the state of Florida and move them to other locations, then you could possibly apply RICO to that, because that's what RICO is about, is a criminal organization. With regard to human trafficking, uh, there's a couple of issues there. Often, human trafficking is looked at to prevent moving people interstate for sex or for involuntary servitude and things like that. I'm not sure that that applies, but it's interesting though that there are specific statutes with regard to human trafficking as it relates to immigrants and immigration that falls under the immigration law. So that's something that certainly would have to be looked at, but it doesn't appear, at first blush that this is, involuntary servitude or forced labor or any sexual aspect to this.
Do you think the DOJ will actually open an investigation into this? Right now, they're tight-lipped, as you would expect to be. They haven't issued a comment on this. What happens behind the scenes? I mean, just because Newsom or Hillary Clinton or somebody else says, "Oh, I'm asking for the DOJ to investigate it," that's not a call to action, right? How does it start the process for them, and what usually happens behind the scenes? And do you think that they would actually start an investigation here?
Well, certainly, a governor, former secretary of state, who and senator who says, "Hey, this is something that should be investigated," is certainly going to get the antennas up at the Department of Justice. But I don't think that that is necessarily a call to action that the DOJ, that Merrick Garland has to now go forward and investigate this. But Jesse, the thing is, I mean, this is a very strange set of circumstances. I mean, immigrants in border states are being put on planes and just dropped off in other locations. I think, in my opinion, that it merits some review. What kind of conduct is this for state elected officials, for Governor DeSantis, for Governor Abbott, to just randomly select 50 or 100 immigrants that we're going to put on a plane and we're going to send someplace else? I think it begs for some review, whether that's in a Department of Justice investigation or some other agency or entity. It certainly deserves scrutiny.
And let's just be clear. Does it matter whether or not they're illegal or legal? In the sense that if these are illegal immigrants who are coming in, they're crossing the border, that doesn't change the analysis whatsoever, right? I want to make that clear.
I don't think that it does. I don't think that it makes any difference. What you have are either people who, as you said, might be illegal, or people who've entered legally. They're still being put in a position when they're at their most vulnerable, to be put on a plane and to be sent off to some place that's really not fully prepared to handle the situation as it would be in on the border. It's just it's politics, and politics of the worst kind.
Well, let me ask you this. You talk about politics, right? So if people are calling for the governors to do this, and the reason I say this because there's radio host Clay Travis, he called for people, allegedly called for people to take Senator Elizabeth Warren's statements to heart and literally send migrants her way, because she had said exploiting vulnerable people for political stunts is repulsive and cruel. Massachusetts is fully capable of handling asylum seekers, and I'll keep working with local, state, and federal partners to ensure we have the necessary resources to care for people with dignity. Well, then he said, why not send every single illegal immigrant right now to Massachusetts so that Elizabeth Warren can make sure that this repulsive and cruel system is taken care of? And so I guess the question is if he or somebody who has a platform is encouraging this, and it's deemed that it's illegal to be doing this, to be sending migrants to these locations, then could they face any kind of jeopardy whatsoever?
You mean the radio host, or
The
the people who
radio
are
host,
making this?
the radio host, politicians who are advocating it. So anybody who's supporting it and saying this is a good idea, do it. Can they face any jeopardy?
Well, I think there has to be a distinction between rhetoric, which we know that political rhetoric flies around all over the place, and it's very heated, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. But taking action on that rhetoric, I think, is a step too far. Okay, so it's one thing to banter around, oh, we're going to send them up to you, and oh yeah, we want them, we can take care of them. But when you actually take that step, is that responsible? Is that a responsible thing to do for an elected leader in a state to take that kind of action? Rhetoric is one thing. Now action is a completely different story. And what's the end result for these people who have been displaced, from these border communities where they're prepared to deal with them and sent off to Massachusetts or sent off to Washington, D.C.?
Real quick, Matt, before I sign you off, I also have to imagine, if you are a governor who's orchestrating this, right, and something should happen to one of these migrants, they get injured, couldn't you face some sort of civil liability?
I would certainly think so. What you've done by making this, we can all agree, a political statement, is that you put human beings at risk. In fact, you put children at risk because you want to make a political statement, because you want to show Senator Warren that, yeah, here's some immigrants, let's see how you deal with them. I think you could open your state up to liability for such reckless conduct if someone were injured or harmed or killed as a result of this displacement.
Matthew Mangino, thanks for coming on and breaking it down with me, and we'll see where this unfolds, because we might not hear the end of it. Matthew, thank you so much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.